Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you all had a great weekend. Today, we're going to be talking about the important people of the revolution. You should all have your unit packet out for this. It is going to be on the front side of the second page, I believe. So, as we go through this, just listen to the important points that I need to explain and then write down any underlying information. There are quite a few people, as you can see, so we're going to try to get through this in a timely manner. There will also be a quiz sometime this week over these people, so make sure you pay attention and make sure you get everything down. Alright, so the first person, Abigail Adams. I believe you guys already have something written down for her, but just go ahead and pay attention to this slide. She was the wife of John Adams, and she did support independence. She was a patriot. When her husband and the others in the Congress were trying to decide on whether or not they wanted to declare independence, she did remind him to take care of the women. She said, please, make sure women get their rights. We are just the same as men, and so we deserve our rights. She conveyed this information through letters with him. There are several documents that we have and several primary sources that we have that are their actual letters to and from each other. The quote that you need to remember the most for this is remember the ladies. So she was fighting for women's rights during a time when women didn't really have any rights at all. Alright, so next we have John Adams. He was a lawyer and politician during the Revolutionary era. He is known for defending the British soldiers after the Boston Massacre. If you remember us talking about the Boston Massacre last week, not many people wanted to defend them. They all wanted the British soldiers to be harshly punished. And John Adams was the type of person to say, well, you know what? They're innocent until proven guilty. So he decided to take it upon himself to go and defend the British soldiers because he thought it was only fair that they be treated like this. He was also a member of the Continental Congress, which is the Congress that ultimately decided to declare independence, and it's the Congress that the form of government that got us through the Revolution. He represented his home state of Massachusetts, and he was, of course, a strong supporter of independence. He advocated very hard for independence, and he was also one of the ones to sign the Declaration of Independence. We are going over the Continental Congress and the Declaration of Independence later this week, so be prepared to learn about that. Next, we have Wentworth Treswell. As you can see, there's not a picture of him. We don't really know much about him besides just the main key points that he played in the Revolution. He was an African American patriot. No, he was not a slave during this time. Contrary to belief that all African Americans were slaves, he was not a slave, honestly. He did support independence. He did support the Americans. He was like Paul Revere. He made an all-night ride back from Boston to his hometown to warn them that the British were coming, to help them be prepared. War is coming, this is happening. He also served in the army, and he fought at the Battle of Saratoga. He was a key part in the winning of the Battle of Saratoga. He informed many commanders and many of the American officers of what was going on, and he helped them win the battle. And next we have Samuel Adams. He is the cousin of John Adams. He is known for creating the Sons of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty, if you remember, they were a group of guys in the Boston area who got together and they were supporting independence, and they did this through protesting and boycotting the British goods. The stuff that you need to know mainly about him is, again, the Sons of Liberty. He organized opposition to the Stamp Act. So boycotting, they refused to buy any paper that had stamps on it. They said, you know what, this is a ridiculous price. We're not going to pay for it. We don't want it. And then he did play a major part in the Boston Massacre. He was a part of the crowd. If you remember from the video clip that I showed last week, he was a part of the crowd. And he was a part of, like, the instigators. Like, he was one of the instigators who started the whole Boston Massacre. Yes, we can assume he did feel bad. There is no documentation to prove that he actually did feel bad for doing any of this, which we're going to assume, like, at some point he did feel bad about the Boston Massacre, but he was mainly just angry at the British the entire time. Okay, next we have Mercy Otis Warren. We went over her a little bit last week. She was married to a patriot in Massachusetts. She anonymously wrote several propaganda pieces for the Committee of Correspondence. So if you remember the Committee of Correspondence, they were the group of people who were in charge of going through and distributing all of this propaganda all throughout all of the 13 colonies. They were a major part in spreading news about the Boston Massacre and that engraving that Paul Revere had. And if you need to see the engraving in the picture that Paul Revere drew of the Boston Massacre, it is hanging on the back wall by the door. So keep that in mind. That will be there for the entire year. She is also known for writing the first history of the American Revolutionary War. She had taken notes on everything that she had witnessed and everything that she was told, and she took notes. She wrote a book at the end of the war. So very first history of the Revolutionary War was written by this lady, Mercy Otis Warren. All right, next we have James Armistead. This man was a slave in Virginia. He was recruited by a guy named Marquis de Lafayette, which we're going to go over Marquis de Lafayette later in this PowerPoint. But he was recruited by Marquis de Lafayette. He was going to be a spy for the Continental Army. The Continental Army is the American Army. He did pose as a double agent. He went to the British and he was like, you know what, I want to be free one day, so I'm going to fight for you. The British were offering freedom to those slaves who decided to fight for Britain. So he's like, you know what, I want freedom, so I'm going to fight for you guys. So he was under the guise of fighting for the British, but he was actually gaining intellect from the British and passing it on to the Americans. And that was the truthful stuff that he was doing. But he was also posing as a spy for the British. The British were like, you know what, you've been a slave in Virginia. We want you to spy on us. He was passing false information on to the British from the American side. But he was giving true, actual information on the British to the Americans. He did, by doing this, he helped the Americans win the Battle of Yorktown. He passed on info on the British commander to one of the American commanders. I think it was like General Washington, actually. And the Americans knew where the British were going to be and at what time they were going to be there. So the Americans had the advantage and the upper hand there, thanks to this guy, James Armistead. Next, we have Ben Franklin. He was an interesting character during the Revolution. He honestly didn't live much longer after the Revolution ended. He got through the writing of the Constitution, and then that was about it. Like, he died right after. He was a member of the committee who wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was one of the three. But during the actual war, he spent his time in France. He was partying it up in France. He was living it up in France. He is known as a ladies' man in France. The French ladies liked him for some reason. He would go out and literally just party and, like, spend time and, like, just receive all this attention from the French, and he loved it. in France, he was supposed to be representing the colonies as the American envoy. So he was there to talk with the French government about trying to form an alliance. And he was there from 1776, so right after the writing of the Declaration of Independence, he went to France, and then he stayed there until 1785, 2 years after the war ended. He eventually did negotiate the alliance with France, and then the Treaty of Paris, of 1783, which ended the war. So he had a major part in all of this, but he was not in America during the time of the war. Keep in mind, he was in France, and he was a part of the committee that wrote the Declaration of Independence. All right, next we have Crispus Attucks. We talked about him last week when we were talking about the Boston Massacre. He was an African-American man. He was a merchant. He was a sailor. He was only in Boston for the night, and he is known as being the first person to die during the Boston Massacre. Okay, that is the most important thing about him. We don't have any actual paintings of him. This is just a drawing of him. We can assume by his signature at the bottom it was a self-drawing, so maybe he drew it himself. But other than that, he was African-American, merchant, only in Boston for the night, and he was killed in the Boston Massacre by the British. So very first person to die in the war. Next, we have King George III. He was also a very interesting character during the war. His nickname is Mad King George. He was very strict on the colonists. He wanted the crown to maintain an aggressive policy against colonial resistance, so that's why he sent the entire British army, or like 3/4 of the army, over to America because he wanted to put down the rebellion. And he felt like they had the upper hand because they had the stronger military. He did this because he thought that if he lost one group of colonies, he was going to eventually lose all groups of colonies. So he thought he was going to lose the colonies in Canada and the colonies in India and the ones in Australia and New Zealand, and I think they had some in Africa too, and in Africa. So he was afraid that if he lost the Americas, he was going to lose everything else. So that's why he did this. He did struggle to enforce royal authority throughout his reign, because he was basically a 5-year-old kid in a 35-year-old body. There's one point where he's in his throne room and he's getting fitted for a new outfit similar to the one he's wearing in this picture, and his advisors come in and they tell him, "Your Highness, the crown is broke. We have no more money. We can't buy any more of these fancy clothes for you. We are unable to have this big military and spend all this money on the military. So we're going to have to start borrowing money if we want to do that." He got so upset. He literally sat down in his throne room and he cried and threw a temper tantrum in a hissy fit. So, he's called Mad King George because of that. He literally acted like a child. But he was very aggressive. He was just afraid of losing what he had. He liked what he had. He liked the money. And he just didn't want to lose anymore. So, King George III, there you go. Next is Patrick Henry. He was a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses. Just take a moment and just think, what was important about the Virginia House of Burgesses? I'll give you a second. Okay, so Virginia House of Burgesses, first representative assembly in the colonies. It was created in 1619 in Virginia. It had lasted from 1619 until the time of the Revolution, okay, and it was still going after that. This guy Patrick Henry, he was a member of it, and he was very adamant about speaking out against the Stamp Act. In one of his speeches, his most famous quote from his most famous speech was, "Give me liberty or give me death." he was saying, you know what, I want to be free. And if I'm not going to be able to be free from Britain, I would rather die. Like, that's how bad he thought it was. He said, I don't want to be a part of Britain anymore. So it's either we're going to win our independence and we're going to declare independence from Britain, or I'm going to literally die. He did serve in the Continental Army during the Revolution. So he was part of the army. But the thing you need to know about him is the quote, "Give me liberty or give me death." All right, next we have Thomas Jefferson. You're going to learn a little bit more about Thomas Jefferson, as well as John Adams and George Washington in November when we talk about the first 5 presidents. So Thomas Jefferson, he was very young. I think it was like late 20s, early 30s during the Revolution. He was a delegate to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. He was representing Virginia. That is where he was from. He was a member of the committee that wrote the Declaration of Independence. It was Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and I believe Robert Livingston. I think it was Robert Livingston, the 3 of them. And Franklin and Livingston said, you know what, I don't want to write the Declaration. And they're like, you know what, Jefferson, you have the better writing. Anyways, so they picked Jefferson to write it. He wrote it in 3 days' time in Philadelphia. It was extremely hot outside. It's the summertime. He wrote it between July 1st and July 3rd. He was sitting in his little hotel room, all cooped up. No one saw him. He never left the room for 3 days. They brought food to him. He had gone through, I think, like about maybe 100 drafts, a little more, a little less than that. He would, if he didn't like it, he would crumble it up, throw it on the floor, and start all over again. So he wrote the Declaration of Independence in 3 days. It was all his. When it got time for the delegates to eventually approve of it, they did get rid of some of it. Again, we're getting over the Declaration of Independence more later this week, so you'll learn more about that then. But Thomas Jefferson, during the Revolution, chief writer of the Declaration of Independence. All right, now we have the Marquis de Lafayette. He was a French aristocrat. He was only, I think, like 19 or 20 when the war took place. He had already been a part of several different wars. He was a very high-ranking officer in the French army. After the French decided to join the Americans in the war, he came over here and he was a major general in the army. So he helped Washington train the colonial soldiers, and they eventually became the Continental Army. He was very flamboyant. He was a ladies' man. All the ladies loved him, if you can tell by the picture. I don't know. But the thing you need to know about him is he helped the French, he was the main person from France who helped the Americans. He's the main little envoy for them. In the actual military, he did help win many battles against the British after the French joined the war. Now you have Thomas Paine. He wrote this pamphlet called Common Sense. He said, you know what? It should be common sense to have all of these rights. He was an Englishman. He already had all of these rights. He came directly from England to America. He didn't like what the crown was doing to America. So he wrote this pamphlet called Common Sense. And he said, all of these rights that the English have, you should have. It should be common sense that you have them. And the pamphlet was extremely popular. They were selling out like every single day. They had to print new ones. It was the best-selling book of this time. And it did persuade Americans to join the Patriot cause. So if they were kind of like leaning on the fence, like, should we keep up with the British? Should we keep up with the Americans? I don't know. Once they read Common Sense, they decided to join the American side. Next, we have George Washington. Again, you're going to learn about him a little more in November with the first 5 presidents, because he was the first president. He was for Virginia. He was a soldier in the French and Indian War. If you remember, he was only 21 at the time of the French and Indian War. So he's a little bit older now. He had some experience. They lost the majority of his army during that one battle for the Ohio River Valley. He was a delegate to the First and Second Continental Congress. So he was a part of deciding if they were going to declare for independence. He was commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the Revolution. So you need to know he was the general during the Revolution. He was in charge of the entire American army. So there you go. Next we have John Paul Jones. I believe this is the last person. He is considered the father of the U.S. Navy. He did gain international recognition as a commander in the Navy, and he's like, you know what? In order for us to win against the British, we have to have a good Navy. If not, then we're just kind of, just leaving our ocean defenses open, and we are not going to get, have the advantage over the British that we need. So he said, let's keep the Navy. I'll figure some stuff out for the Navy. I'll help command it, and there we have it. So that is the end of this PowerPoint. Make sure you have at least one major important thing written down for each of those people. There are a lot of people, I am aware. I don't like the fact that you have to know a lot of people for this one unit. But make sure you have something written down for every single person. Remember, if they are going to be important later, like Washington or Adams and Jefferson, just know what they did in the Revolution for this unit. Nothing else. Just the Revolution. Don't worry about anything else. There will be a quiz, again, sometime later this week. You are going to have another lesson that we're going to do similar to this, but just keep in mind there's going to be a quiz, so make sure you have something written down for every single person. I will let you study before you take that quiz for a few minutes. I'm only thinking it's going to be over 5 people. Haven't decided which people yet. So make sure you get that done. And yeah, so I hope you guys like doing lessons like this. If you do and you feel like it's going to be better for you than having me stand up there and you have to listen to the commotion of everyone else, then we can start doing it like this. I want this to be beneficial to you guys, so please just utilize this. I will answer any questions you have at any time during the class period. I will be here for you. I am here to help you, okay? That's what I'm here for. So please let me know if you have any questions, and make sure you get everything down. And I really hope you guys have a great day, and I hope you have a great week. I'm looking forward to this week. So I will see you all later.